They told Declan Voss the woman in tent 14 was a danger to herself, and that was enough to get him moving through the rain at 4 in the morning with his sidearm holstered and a med kit he probably would not need. The refugee camp at Vester Basin was not supposed to exist. 12 weeks earlier, it had been a dry lake bed on a contested border world, nothing but cracked alkaline mud and survey markers left by a geological team that had packed up and gone home 6 years ago. Then the Kilauea Ascendancy collapsed, and the survivors came pouring across the neutral zone in cargo haulers and atmospheric skimmers, and toward the end on foot. 40,000 displaced aliens in a basin built for nothing, administered by a joint human-Thalari peacekeeping detachment that was undermanned, undersupplied, and 1 bad week away from a riot. Declan was the senior human security officer. That sounded more important than it was. It meant he had 11 soldiers, a prefab command post with a leaking roof, and the unenviable job of keeping order among a population that outnumbered his entire team by a factor of 3,000 to 1. He was 41 years old, dark-haired, scarred across the bridge of his nose from a piece of shrapnel he had taken during the Korathi border incident 8 years ago, and tired in a way that sleep no longer fixed. He had been a bodyguard, once close protection for diplomatic envoys, before the peacekeeping corps absorbed his unit and sent him to places like this. The bodyguard instinct had never left. He still walked into rooms scanning for threats, still positioned himself between a charge and the nearest door, still woke at sounds that did not belong. The sound that had woken him tonight was a report from the Thalari Night Watch. A woman in the isolation block was standing in the rain outside her tent, unresponsive, staring at the northern sky. She had been doing it for an hour. She would not answer questions in any of the 4 Kilauea dialects the translator unit could process. She would not sit. She would not eat. She had arrived 3 days ago in a group of 68 survivors pulled from a disabled cargo hauler, and no one knew her name because she had not spoken a single word since her intake processing. Declan splashed through the mud between the rows of tents, his boots sinking with each step. The rain was cold and relentless. This world's wet season had arrived 2 weeks early, turning the basin into a shallow lake that crept an inch higher every day. The isolation block was on the eastern perimeter, a row of reinforced tents reserved for refugees who needed medical or psychological monitoring before being moved into the general population. Most of the occupants were injured. A few were catatonic. One, according to the intake officer's notes, had tried to harm herself with a tent stake on her second night and had been restrained, evaluated, and placed under observation. Tent 14. He dug through the outer flap and stopped. She was not inside. She was standing just beyond the tent's rain awning, barefoot in the mud, wearing the standard-issue refugee tunic, gray, shapeless, too large for her narrow frame. The rain ran down her face and her arms and pooled around her feet, and she did not flinch. She was looking at the sky with an expression that Declan had seen before, in different faces, on different worlds. It was the expression of someone listening for something that was no longer there. She was Kilauea. That much was obvious: the long, tapered ears that curved upward like drawn blades, the high cheekbones, the faintly luminous quality of her skin. But where most Kilauea refugees in the camp had the warm amber or coppery gold coloring typical of the middle castes, this woman's skin was pale silver blue, almost translucent, with a faint opalescent shimmer that caught the camp's floodlights and scattered them like light through quartz. Her hair was long and black, heavy with rain, hanging past her shoulder blades. Her eyes, when she finally turned her head to look at him, were large and dark, the irises a deep violet black that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. There was no pupil he could distinguish. "I'm Declan," he said. He kept his voice low and even, the way he had learned during close protection training, the voice you used when someone was standing on a ledge and you needed them to believe you were the safest thing in the room. "I'm the security lead. Can I sit with you?" She looked at him, through him, past him, then she turned back to the sky. He sat down on the overturned supply crate beside the tent entrance, let the rain soak through his jacket, and waited. That was how it started. He would tell the story later, years later, in a room he could not have imagined, and he would always begin it the same way. Not with the politics, not with the war, not with the intelligence briefing that would, 6 weeks later, turn everything inside out. He started with the rain, and the woman who would not speak, and the fact that he sat with her until dawn because something in the way she held herself told him she was not broken. She was waiting. He did not know for what. The camp's senior medical officer was a Thalari named Dr. Orath, who had long gray ears and a manner that suggested she had seen too many patients and slept too few hours. She called Declan to her clinic tent the next morning, poured him a cup of something bitter and caffeinated, and spread a datapad across the folding table between them. "Your patient in 14, she said. "I ran a full biometric panel when they brought her in. Standard procedure for self-harm cases. The results are unusual." Declan waited. Orath was not the kind of doctor who used the word unusual casually. Her cellular regeneration rate is roughly 4 times the calorie baseline. Her bone density is 30% higher than it should be for her build. Her neural architecture shows patterning I have only seen in academic texts, specifically in studies of the calorie sovereign caste. Orath tapped the datapad. The sovereign caste was supposed to be extinct. The ascendancy's own records declared the royal bloodline terminated during the purges 7 years ago. Every member of the ruling family was accounted for executed, confirmed dead, gene-scanned post-mortem. She paused. This woman's biometrics are consistent with a first-generation sovereign, not a descendant, not a carrier. A direct member. Declan set down his cup. "You're telling me she's Kalori royalty." "I'm telling you her biology matches a caste that officially does not exist anymore. Whether she is royalty in any political sense is a different question. But if the Kalori diaspora in this camp discovers that a sovereign caste woman is alive and sitting in an isolation tent 300 meters from them, we will have a situation that your 11 soldiers cannot contain." "What kind of situation?" Orath's gray ears flattened the Thalari expression of deep discomfort. The sovereign caste was not merely political. Among the Kalori, the sovereign bloodline carries a biological function, a resonance frequency that stabilizes the neural bonding network their species relies on for emotional regulation. When the last sovereign died, the network degraded. That degradation is part of why the ascendancy collapsed. These refugees lost their sovereign, and then they lost the biological mechanism that helped them process grief as a community. They have been in emotional free fall for 7 years. She met his eyes. "If they learn she exists, they will either worship her or kill her, depending on whether they blame the sovereign caste for the collapse. I cannot predict which." Declan sat with that for a long time. "Keep this between us," he said finally. "Don't log the sovereign caste flag in the general medical system. Label it anomalous and restricted. I'll take personal charge of Tent 14. You're a security officer, not a caretaker." "I was a bodyguard before I was a security officer. Close protection is what I know." Orath studied him for a moment the way the Thalari doctors studied everything, with those slow, evaluating eyes that missed nothing. Then she nodded. He went back to Tent 14 that afternoon with a folding chair, a canteen of clean water, and a ration bar that he set on the ground beside her without comment. She was inside the tent this time, sitting cross-legged on her cot, her hands folded in her lap. She did not look at the ration bar. She did not look at the water. She looked at him with those deep violet black eyes, and something in her expression shifted, not recognition, not yet, more like the faintest stirring of attention. "I'm going to be here for a while," Declan said, settling into the folding chair by the tent entrance. "You don't have to talk. You don't have to eat, but I'm staying." He stayed. He stayed that day, and the next day, and the day after that. He adjusted his duty rotation so that his mornings belonged to Tent 14, and he spent them sitting in the folding chair reading supply reports on his datapad while she sat on her cot and said nothing. Sometimes she watched him. Sometimes she watched the tent wall. Once on the fourth morning she picked up the canteen he had left and drank from it, and he noted it in his log without comment, because a bodyguard knew that the first sip of water was not about thirst. It was about trust. On the fifth day she spoke. "You come every day." Her voice was low and careful, the words precise, as though she were selecting each one from a diminished supply. She spoke Galactic Common with an accent he could not place, not the clipped dialect of the Kalori middle castes that he had been hearing around the camp, but something older, more formal, each syllable given its full weight. "I do," Declan said. "The others come and go. The doctor, the night watch, the translator, they ask questions and leave. You sit. That's what I'm good at." Something crossed her face, not a smile, but the faint shadow of where a smile might live if it were safe to come out. "What do you do while you sit?" "Supply reports mostly. We're short on water purification tablets and long on paperwork." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "My name was Elindra." "Was?" Names require someone to speak them. No one has spoken mine in 7 years. Declan set down his datapad. "Elindra," he said, giving the word its full weight the way she had given hers. 4 syllables. He did not shorten it. Her eyes glistened, not tears, not quite. A brightness that came and went like a signal flare seen through fog. She looked away, and her fingers tightened on the edge of her cot, and she did not speak again that morning. But when he came back the next day, the ration bar was gone. He learned her story in fragments, the way you learn the shape of a landscape when the fog lifts in patches. She did not tell it in order. She did not tell it willingly. It came out in pieces over the next 3 weeks, a sentence here, a correction there, sometimes a long silence that he understood was not refusal, but the sound of someone navigating wreckage. She had been the heir apparent of the Kalori ascendancy. First daughter of sovereign Mithari, carrier of the resonance bond, trained from birth to stabilize the neural network that held her species together. When the purges came, a military coup led by a faction that blamed the sovereign caste for diplomatic failures, with the neighboring Vreth dominion her mother had hidden her. Hidden her in the most complete way possible. A neural dampener implanted at the base of her skull that suppressed her sovereign caste biology and erased her conscious memory of who she was. For 7 years, Elindra had lived as a nameless, displaced worker in the outer territories of what had been the ascendancy. She had labored in processing plants and cargo depots, believing she was an orphan from a border settlement. The dampener had done its work thoroughly. She had no memory of her mother, no memory of the court, no memory of the resonance bond or what it felt like to be the anchor of an entire species' emotional architecture. She had lived as a ghost, and the only sign that something was wrong was the recurring dream she could never quite hold on to. A room filled with light, and a voice calling a name she could not hear. The dampener had begun to fail 3 months ago. The memories had started to return, not as coherent recollections, but as sensory fragments, the texture of sovereign caste robes, the harmonic frequency of a court anthem, the face of a woman with silver blue skin and dark eyes who looked at her with an expression that made her chest ache in a way she could not name. She had begun to remember who she was, and the remembering was tearing her apart, because to remember was to also remember what had been lost. Her mother executed, her court destroyed, her people scattered, the resonance bond degraded to static. That was why she had tried to hurt herself in the tent. Not despair. Overload. The dampener's failure was releasing 7 years of suppressed grief and sovereign caste neural activity simultaneously, and her mind was drowning in it. Declan listened to all of this the way he had been trained to listen, without interrupting, without offering solutions, without the kind of well-meaning reassurance that was really about the listener's discomfort rather than the speaker's need. He listened and he watched her eyes, and he saw the courage it took to speak each sentence. A woman reassembling herself from pieces, not sure which ones fit anymore. "The dampener," he said, on the afternoon she told him about it. "Can Orath remove it?" Removing it would release the full sovereign resonance at once. In a camp of 40,000 traumatized Kalori, the effect would be unpredictable, like dropping a tuning fork into a room full of cracked bells. Some would resonate, some would shatter. So it stays in. For now, it is degrading on its own. Eventually it will fail completely, and the resonance will emerge whether anyone is ready or not. How long? Weeks. Perhaps less. Declan sat with that calculation the way he sat with everything quietly, processing, running contingencies. He had been a bodyguard long enough to know that the most dangerous variable in any protection detail was time, because time turned manageable risks into inevitable ones. "Then we need to prepare the camp," he said. "You cannot prepare 40,000 people for something they do not know is coming." "I can prepare myself, and I can prepare the perimeter, and I can make sure that when it happens, you are not alone." She looked at him with those dark violet-black eyes, and this time there was no fog in the signal. Why? He could have said it was his job. He could have said it was protocol, the security officer's responsibility to manage emerging threats. He could have said any number of things that were true, and none of which were the real answer. "Because someone should have been sitting with you for the last 7 years, he said, "and no one was, so I'm here now." The brightness in her eyes returned, and this time it stayed. He would tell this part of the story carefully, because it was the part where the line between duty and devotion blurred beyond recovery. He reorganized his entire security operation around Tent 14. Not overtly, he was too experienced for that. He adjusted patrol routes so that 2 of his people passed the isolation block every 15 minutes. He moved his own quarters to the adjacent tent. He requisitioned a secondary medkit from Orath, studied the Sovereign Caste neural architecture papers she gave him, and learned to recognize the signs of a dampener cascade. The tremors in her hands, the sudden unfocusing of her eyes, the low harmonic hum that sometimes emanated from her chest when a fragment of memory broke through. During the cascades, he sat beside her cot and talked. Not about anything important: supply logistics, the weather, a story about a guard dog he had owned as a boy on Earth. The content did not matter. What mattered was the steady, unbroken sound of a human voice anchoring her while the memories crashed through. She told him once, after a particularly bad episode, that his voice was the only thing that did not vibrate at the frequency of loss. Everything Kalori carried the resonance. Everything in the camp hummed with the degraded remnant of what the sovereign bond had been. His voice human, untuned, outside the harmonic spectrum entirely, was the one solid thing in a world made of broken music. He did not know what to do with that, so he kept talking. The camp deteriorated around them. Week 7 brought a supply shortage that halved the water ration. Week 8 brought a fever that swept through the eastern sector and killed 31 refugees before Orath's team contained it. Week 9 brought the thing Declan had been dreading. A political faction among the Kalori refugees, led by a former military commander named Vashran, began demanding that the peacekeeping force hand over administrative control of the camp to a Kalori governing council. The demand was not unreasonable on its face, but Vashran's rhetoric carried an edge that Declan recognized from a dozen other failed states, the language of someone who wanted power, not governance. And Vashran was looking for a sovereign. Not because he wanted one, because the Kalori political structure required one. Without a sovereign to anchor the resonance bond, no governing council could claim legitimacy under Kalori law. Vashran needed either a sovereign or proof that none existed, and he was sending his people through the camp asking questions, checking lineage records, demanding biometric access that Declan's team had no legal authority to deny. Declan sat in his command post at midnight, staring at the security feeds and calculated. The dampener was failing. The resonance would emerge. When it did, every Kalori in the camp would feel it, a frequency they had not felt in 7 years, the missing anchor suddenly present, as unmistakable as a heartbeat after silence. And then Vashran would know. And then 40,000 people would turn toward Tent 14. And what happened next would depend on whether they saw a sovereign to follow or a sovereign to blame. He went to her tent. She was awake, sitting on her cot, her hands trembling in her lap. The dampener was pulsing. He could see the faint light beneath the skin at the base of her skull, flickering like a dying star. "It's close," she said. "I know. When it happens, you should not be near me. The resonance will affect every sentient being within range. Humans may not be on the harmonic spectrum, but the neural cascade. I've been near you for 9 weeks. I'm not leaving now." She looked at him, and her expression was something he had never seen on any face, human or alien. It was the look of someone who had spent 7 years believing they were alone in the universe, and was now confronting the possibility that they were not. "You will be hurt," she said. "The resonance cannot distinguish between comfort and pain at the intensities I will emit. Everyone in range will feel 7 years of suppressed sovereign grief at once. I sat through the Korathi border incident. I can sit through this." The Korathi border incident did not involve a telepathic grief bomb. Despite everything, the corner of his mouth twitched. "No, but it did involve a lot of shrapnel, and I'm still here." She did not smile, but something in her eyes softened a warmth behind the wet brightness that was not tears and not quite anything else. It was recognition. The same recognition he had seen in fragments over the past 9 weeks, but whole now, unbroken, as clear as a bell struck in a quiet room. "Declan," she said. It was the first time she had spoken his name. He waited. When the resonance comes, the Kalori will need a sovereign. The resonance bond requires an anchor, someone to hold the frequency steady so the network can restabilize. I am the last carrier. If I do not anchor the bond, the network will continue to degrade, and my people will lose the capacity for shared emotional regulation entirely. They will fragment. They will scatter. They will become 40,000 isolated individuals in a universe that already forgot them once. Then you anchor the bond. If I anchor the bond, I become the sovereign, not symbolically, biologically. The bond locks. The responsibility locks. I become the center of their emotional architecture for the rest of my life. Every grief, every joy, every fear, I hold the frequency for all of them. I cannot leave. I cannot step away. I cannot be anything other than the sovereign. Her voice cracked just barely on the last word. I was hidden so I could live. My mother gave me 7 years of freedom. If I anchor the bond, that freedom ends. And if you don't, my people die, not in body, in spirit. The bond degrades to nothing, and they lose the thing that makes them Kalori. He understood the shape of it then, the impossible geometry. She could save her people by sacrificing the only thing her mother had given her the chance to be something other than a sovereign, or she could keep her freedom and watch her people dissolve. He sat in the folding chair and looked at her in the dim light of the tent, and he did not offer advice, and he did not offer comfort, because some choices were too large for either. Instead, he said the thing that was true. "Whatever you choose, I will be in this chair. You are a security officer. Your assignment." "My assignment ended 2 weeks ago. I requested an extension. The extension was denied. I am currently listed as absent without leave." He said it the same way he said everything, steadily, without emphasis, as though the words were a weather report. "I'm not here because of an assignment, Elindra." She was quiet for a long time. "Then why?" He thought about it. He thought about the rain on the first night, and the canteen she had not touched for 4 days, and the moment she had spoken his name for the first time, and the sound of her voice when the cascades hit, not screaming, never screaming, just a low harmonic vibration that filled the tent and shook the water in the canteen, and made his teeth ache and his chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with shrapnel. "Because you are the bravest person I have ever met," he said. "And I have met a lot of people, and none of them stood in the rain for an hour on a world that was not their own, looking at a sky that had nothing left in it and still refused to fall down." She pressed her hand to her mouth. Not a dramatic gesture, small, private, the kind of thing a person did when the alternative was making a sound they were not ready to release. Her eyes glistened, wet and luminous, and she did not look away from him. "You cannot stay," she whispered. "If I become the sovereign, the court will reform, the Kalori will build again, and a human bodyguard with no rank and no crest will be an anomaly, a vulnerability. They will use the same word every court uses for the thing they do not understand. I've been called worse. They will try to remove you. They can try." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sob, and entirely neither. "You are the most stubborn sentient being I have ever encountered." "I've been told." The dampener pulsed again, brighter this time, and she flinched. He saw the tremor run through her hands, up her arms, into her shoulders. The harmonic hum started low, subsonic, a vibration he felt in his molars before he heard it with his ears. The tent canvas rippled. "It's starting," she said. "Declan, go." "No. You will feel." "I know what I'll feel. 7 years of grief from a species I barely understand, compressed into a single moment. I sat through your cascades. I know the frequency. I can hold." "This is not a cascade. This is the full sovereign resonance, unfiltered, uncontrolled." "Then you'd better have someone steady in the room when it hits. Someone who doesn't vibrate at your frequency. Someone whose voice you can hear through the noise." The light at the base of her skull flared. She gasped, and her back arched, and the hum became a tone, a single, clear, devastating note that rang through the tent and out into the night air of the camp. Declan felt it hit his chest like a physical blow. Grief. Not his grief, hers and her mother's, and the grief of an entire species that had lost its anchor 7 years ago and had been falling ever since. He stayed in the chair. His knuckles were white on the armrests. His jaw ached from clenching. Behind his eyes, fragments that were not his memories flickered. A throne room burning, a woman with silver blue skin pressing a device to the base of a child's skull, a voice saying, "Run, forget, live." The last sovereign's final gift to her daughter, not survival, but ignorance. The mercy of not knowing what had been lost. He breathed through it. Combat breathing in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Not because it helped with telepathic grief, but because it was something to do, and Declan Voss had learned long ago that the opposite of panic was not courage. It was routine. You did the next thing, and the next, and the next. "Elindra," he said, through teeth that felt like they were vibrating at frequencies teeth were never meant to hold. "I'm here. You're not alone. Whatever you choose." Outside the tent, the camp was waking. He could hear it not with his ears but in the resonance itself, transmitted through whatever fragment of the Kalori bond the full sovereign note had activated. 40,000 people feeling the frequency they had lost. 40,000 cracked bells ringing. Some were crying. Some were shouting. Some were simply standing still, the way Elindra had stood in the rain on the first night, looking at the sky, listening for the thing that had been missing. The tone from Elindra's chest swelled. The tent canvas tore at the seams. The folding chair rattled across the floor, and Declan caught it with his boot and held it steady, because the chair was where he had said he would be, and a bodyguard did not leave his post. She turned to him. Her eyes were fully luminous now, the violet-black irises blazing with a light that was not bioluminescence but something older, something coded into the sovereign caste's biology at a level that predated technology. The resonance bond waking, the anchor remembering what it was. "I have to choose now," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that made the water in his canteen shiver. "If I reach for the bond, I hold it forever. If I let it pass, it dies and they fragment." "Then hold it." "I will lose." "You will lose nothing. You will gain 40,000 people who need you, and you will gain the knowledge that you chose them when you did not have to. And you will gain one human in a folding chair who is not going anywhere." The resonance peaked. She closed her eyes, she opened her hands, and she reached. Declan would describe it later as the sound of a symphony orchestra tuning every instrument, finding the same note, one by one, until the cacophony became a chord. The grief did not disappear. It changed shape. It went from a scream into a song, from a wound into a scar, from chaos into something structured and bearable and shared. He felt it move through the camp like a wave, 40,000 minds finding the frequency, locking onto it, drawing stability from a source they had believed was gone forever. And at the center of it, Elindra. She was standing. He did not remember her standing. She was straight-backed, chin lifted, her hands open at her sides, her skin blazing with the opalescent shimmer that he now understood was not decoration, but function the sovereign cast's biology made visible, the anchor broadcasting. Her hair lifted in the resonance field, black strands floating as though underwater. Her eyes were open and they were looking at him. Not through him, not past him, at him, with an expression he had seen once before in the clinic tent when she had said his name for the first time. Recognition, but deeper now, the kind of recognition that saw past the scarred nose and the weathered face and the absent without leave status and found the thing underneath. The thing that had sat in a folding chair for 9 weeks and talked about guard dogs and water purification, and never once asked her to be anything other than what she was. The resonance settled. The camp went quiet, not silent, but calm in a way it had not been since its founding. The cracked bells had found their chord. Elindra's knees buckled. Declan caught her. Not a dramatic catch, he was out of the chair and beside her in 2 steps, one arm under her shoulders, the other bracing her weight, the way a bodyguard catches a principal who has been standing too long at a state function. Practiced, steady, the kind of support that does not draw attention to itself. She leaned into him, not romantically, not dramatically. The way a person leans into a wall when the floor has stopped being reliable. Her forehead touched his shoulder and she breathed, and the harmonic hum from her chest was no longer grief. It was something else. Something that sounded, to Declan's untrained human ears, like gratitude made audible. "You stayed," she said. "I told you I would. They all say that. I'm not them." She exhaled and straightened, and when she stepped back, her eyes were steady. The sovereign was in them now, the authority, the weight, the biological imperative that would hold her to this bond for the rest of her life. But behind it, directed at him alone, was the woman who had drunk water from his canteen on the 4th day and spoken her name on the 5th, and told him on the 9th week that his voice was the only thing that did not vibrate at the frequency of loss. The camp found them within the hour. Not Vashran. Vashran came later, and that was a different confrontation, a political one that Declan handled with the cold professionalism of a man who had been managing difficult people in high-stakes environments since before Vashran had held a weapon. The people who came first were ordinary refugees, families, children, elderly Kaylori who walked with the slow, stunned gait of people waking from a 7-year nightmare. They came to Tent 14, and they knelt. Not in submission, in recognition. The Kaylori gesture of acknowledging a sovereign was not prostration, it was a single knee, one hand over the heart, eyes raised. It meant, "I see you. I hear the frequency. You are the anchor." They knelt, and they looked at Elindra with the wet, luminous eyes of a species that had been drowning and had just found solid ground, and she stood in the torn remnants of her tent in a gray refugee tunic and bare feet, and held the bond steady. Declan stood behind her and to the left, close protection position, the bodyguard's place. He had not been asked to stand there. No one had assigned it. It was where he belonged, and he knew it the way he knew how to breathe. Oreth appeared at his elbow, her gray ears flat with a complicated emotion. Commander Vashran is assembling a delegation. He will demand a formal sovereignty declaration within the day. He can demand what he likes. She decides the timeline. He has 400 supporters. And she has 40,000. The math isn't complicated. Oreth studied him for a moment. You are listed as absent without leave, Officer Voss. Your commanding officer filed the paperwork this morning. Technically, you no longer have authority to. Doctor, with respect, I stopped doing this for authority about 6 weeks ago. Something shifted in Oreth's expression. The Valari doctor had large, evaluating eyes that had seen more of the galaxy's pain than most people could stomach, and what moved across her face now was not surprise. It was the quiet adjustment of someone recategorizing a variable they had previously underestimated. I see, she said, and then more softly, the sovereign will need a guard. The Kalori tradition requires an oath-bound protector outside the caste structure. Historically, it was always a non-Kalori, someone who could not be compromised by the resonance bond. Declan looked at her. She looked back with the steady patience of someone who had just told him the answer to a question he had not yet asked. He did not respond. He did not need to. He turned back to Elindra and the crowd of kneeling Kalori and the gray morning light of a world that was not his own, and he stood where he stood. Vashran came 3 hours later. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the amber skin and sharp golden eyes of a former military officer, and he brought 30 of his followers into the cleared space in front of Tent 14, as though he owned it. His voice carried the practiced authority of a man accustomed to giving orders. The resonance has returned, he said, not to Elindra but to the crowd. We all felt it. The sovereign cast lives, and we are owed an explanation for why this woman was hidden from her own people in a peacekeeping isolation tent while we suffered. The crowd shifted. Murmurs. Not hostile yet, but uncertain, the sound of 40,000 people who had just regained something precious and were already afraid of losing it. Elindra stepped forward. She was still barefoot, still in the gray tunic. Still, by every visual measure, the least impressive person in the clearing. But when she spoke, the resonance carried her voice the way a concert hall carries a soloist, not amplified, but clarified, every word arriving with its full harmonic weight. You were not owed an explanation, Commander. You were owed a sovereign, and you did not have one because my mother made a choice to save my life at the cost of her own, and the price of that choice was 7 years of silence. She paused. I am here now, not because I was discovered, not because a scan revealed me, because a man who was not Kalori sat in a folding chair beside my cot every morning for 9 weeks and spoke my name when no one else in the galaxy remembered it. The crowd went still. Vashran's jaw tightened. A human, he said. You were restored by a human. I was remembered by a human. The restoration was my choice, but the choice required someone to remind me that I was worth making it. He did. Vashran turned to Declan. His golden eyes swept the scarred nose, the dark hair, the weathered face, the posture of a man who was standing in close protection position without rank, without insignia, without anything except the quiet certainty of someone who had decided where he belonged and was not interested in being moved. And what is his role here? Vashran asked. Elindra looked at Declan. He looked at her. The moment held not dramatic, not cinematic, just 2 people in a muddy refugee camp who had spent 9 weeks sitting in a tent together and knew each other's silences better than most people knew each other's words. He is my veteran, she said. The word landed like a stone in still water. Veteran. Declan did not know the word, but the crowd did. He saw it move through them, the intake of breath, the widening eyes, the subtle straightening of spines. Even Vashran's expression shifted, his mouth pressing into a thin line. Orath, still at Declan's elbow, leaned close. Vethrin, she translated quietly. The oath-bound guardian, the sovereign's shadow. It is the highest non-caste honor in Kalori tradition. It has not been spoken in formal address in 7 years. Declan looked at Elindra. She looked back at him with those deep violet-black eyes, steady and clear, and carrying a warmth that the resonance bond could not have manufactured, because it existed outside the harmonic spectrum entirely. It was the warmth of a woman who had found the one voice in the universe that did not vibrate at the frequency of loss, and had decided to keep it. The Vethrin's place is at the sovereign's left, Orath added, where you are already standing. Vashrin opened his mouth, closed it. He was a military man, and military men understood the geometry of power. The sovereign had spoken. The title had been given. And the human, the scarred, stubborn, absent without leave human, who had sat in a folding chair through a telepathic grief storm, and refused to move, was standing exactly where tradition said he should be. The crowd settled. Not because the politics were resolved. Vashrin would press his agenda, and there would be negotiations and compromises, and the long, difficult work of rebuilding a society from a refugee camp on a world that was never meant to hold it. But the sovereign was anchored. The bond was stable, and the Vethrin was at her left. 3 weeks later, the Peacekeeping Corps sent a liaison to discuss Declan's status. The liaison was a careful bureaucrat who had prepared a folder of regulations and a speech about duty and chain of command, and the impropriety of a human security officer embedding himself in an alien political structure. Declan listened to the speech. Then he handed over his sidearm, his security badge, and his identification tags. "I resign my commission," he said, "effective immediately." The liaison blinked. "You understand that this means you lose your pension, your repatriation benefits, and your standing with." "I understand." "And what will you do?" Declan looked through the tent flap to where Elindra was meeting with the newly formed governing council. Vashrin seated at the table now, contained, cooperating, because the resonance bond did not permit its anchor to be overruled by a faction leader, and the mathematics of legitimacy had settled in the sovereign's favor. She was still wearing the gray tunic. She had refused ceremonial robes until every refugee in the camp had adequate clothing. The gesture was not symbolic. It was practical. And it was the kind of leadership that Declan had recognized in the first hour of the first night, when she stood in the rain and refused to fall down. "What I've been doing," he said. "Stand where I'm standing, stay as long as she'll have me." The liaison left. Declan went back to his post. That was the story he told, years later, in the chamber of the restored Kalori court on a world rebuilt from wreckage. The court was modest, not yet the gleaming architecture of the old ascendancy, but solid, functional, built by hands that remembered what it was to have nothing. The chamber's walls were carved with the names of every refugee who had been in Vestur Basin, 40,000 names in spiraling script, a memorial that served as both decoration and reminder. He told it to the court historian, who was compiling the formal record of the restoration. He told it simply, without embellishment, in the flat measured voice of a man who had never been comfortable with storytelling, and preferred to let the facts carry their own weight. He left out the parts that were private. The night she had spoken his name for the first time, the morning he had realized that the ache in his chest was not the resonance but something far older and entirely human. Those parts belonged to the folding chair and the torn tent and the sound of rain on alkaline mud. When the historian asked about the Vethrin oath, Declan shrugged. "She said the word. I was already standing there. It didn't feel like a ceremony. It felt like stating what was already true." And the resonance. You are outside the harmonic spectrum. You cannot feel the bond the way a Kalori does. "No, but I can feel her. Not through the bond, through 9 weeks of sitting in a chair and learning what her silences mean. I know when she's carrying too much. I know when the bond is straining. I know when she needs someone to talk about water purification tablets for an hour so the frequency has something steady to lean against. That is not what the veteran traditionally. I'm not traditional, I'm human. We don't have resonance bonds. We have folding chairs and stubbornness, and the willingness to show up every morning until the person we're showing up for believes we mean it. The historian paused, stylus hovering over the record. Then he wrote something down, and Declan did not ask what it was, because it did not matter. The record was for history. The truth was in the chamber's south corridor, where Elindra was waiting for him, standing in the late afternoon light that came through the tall windows and turned her silver-blue skin to something that looked like dawn. She looked at him when he emerged from the historian's office. Her eyes were the same deep violet black they had always been, but the darkness in them was different now, not the absence of light, but the presence of depth. 7 years of grief, alchemized by choice into something that could carry the weight of a people. The bond hummed in the air around her, a low, steady frequency that Declan could not hear but could feel in his teeth and his chest, and the place behind his sternum where the old shrapnel scar ached on cold mornings. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "The truth." "Which part?" "The part where I sat in a chair, and you drank from my canteen on the 4th day. Her mouth curved, still not quite a smile. It never was with her. But the shadow of one, the place where a smile lived, kept safe, shared only with the one person who had earned access to it. "You left out the important parts," she said. "The important parts aren't for historians." She extended her hand, not reaching. Offering, the way he had offered the canteen and the ration bar, and the folding chair, and every morning for 9 weeks. He took it. And they walked together through the corridor of the restored court, past the 40,000 names carved in the walls, past the guards who lowered their eyes in respect for the sovereign and her veteran, past the windows where the late light fell in long golden shafts, and out into the courtyard where the world was being rebuilt, one careful piece at a time. He was right where he had always been. At her left, in the chair, for as long as she would have him. Which, as it turned out, was the rest of his life.